Suzy Singh, welcome to the very first episode of the Lumiere Thoughtful Thursdays. And we are delighted to have you in this new year to talk about your book, Seven Karma Codes, right here besides me. I can't stop underlining and marking and making notations as I'm reading. Thank you so much for accepting and agreeing to come as our speaker today.
It's a pleasure and a privilege, Deepa, to be with you.
Suzy, I've known you as my friend and my colleague's wife from many years, a great advertising professional, and we've met socially. And then in 2017, I see some Facebook posts about the book. And then for me, this was like a completely new facet of Suzy that I was getting acquainted with because I didn't really know much about your work as a healer, which you had already started. So tell me a little bit about Suzy, the person, and how did you morph into Suzy, the author?
So, even as a small child, Deepa, and when I was really a toddler, I would say, I used to go to visit my grandparents in Punjab. And usually, my grandfather would come to collect me from Delhi, and we'd take the normal, the roadways, buses back home. And it was during those many visits back to Punjab that I would often encounter accidents on the road. And they were tragic scenes. And as a young child, you can get very overwhelmed when you see such events. I think from that very young age of maybe 4 or 5 years old, my mind had started turning inwards when I was exposed to these events.
Mhm.
And I somehow experienced this fragility of life and human suffering. And so I started observing humans very, very closely. And I think that moment of understanding that life is not just one merry experience of growing up and discovering things, but more so about learning how to deal with complex human experiences and suffering. So that started for me at a very, very young age.
Wow.
This got amplified a lot more when I quit corporate life after being there for a good almost 2 decades, because I realized that humans were primarily driven by three instincts: fear, greed, and the struggle and strive for power. And I think I wanted to belong to a more utopian world. I wanted to be discovering higher human motivations. I thought this was for me an evil existence where you're only driven by selfish instinct. And I think that wanting to bridge into something more heavenly, something more paradisical, more exciting in terms of a spiritual fulfillment was very important. So that's the time when I quit corporate life. We relocated to Delhi. And some months later, we planned a holiday with the family, a road trip to the hills. And it was very peculiar because just a few days before that, I had this very intense and burning desire from within to find enlightenment. And I would spend very long hours, sometimes up to 8 hours in meditation, really burning to discover that state. And when we went on the trip, I had many mystical experiences prior to that. But 2 days after we reached Missouri, we were caught in an earthquake, 6.7 on the Richter scale. It seemed like heavens and earth had moved. And I still remember that experience where my husband was sprawled on all fours like an animal over both my very little tiny daughter and myself in an attempt to protect us if the roof collapsed on us. And I remember praying fervently to survive that, because the idea of being crushed to death with your whole family seemed almost something you didn't even want to reflect upon. And so the next morning, we sort of thought we were driving home to safety, and we just packed the car, and my parents were with us, and we said, let's get back to Delhi. But life has its own ways, and at least in my life, I've experienced that everything comes at you not once but twice over, usually the hard times. And so on the drive back to Delhi, we met with a near fatal car crash, and I had a near death experience. And for my 6-year-old daughter to see what she did, which she shared with me many years later after she grew up, because when you're that young, you have psychic vision. She actually saw me leave my body, and she thought Mama was dead. And then for her to re experience me and come back into the body was not an easy experience. So after that car crash, she was constantly from age 6 asking me the question, when you die, who is going to guide me? And many years later, when she was about 20, I remember she was down with dengue and fairly serious. She had to be hospitalized and was in the ICU when I was tending to her. And I came home one evening and I was just lying on my bed, completely, you would say, exhausted with the emotions and the physical exhaustion. And then I had this flash where I heard my 6-year-old daughter saying, who's going to guide me when you're gone? And there was an instruction that said, you need to start writing that book now. So it was an instruction to me to write this book. And that very night itself, I penned down the first few pages. And of course, it took me 4 long years to write it. But it seemed like a command from another realm that I could not possibly ignore. So that's what really led me to writing the book.
Ooh, that is so special, and thank you for sharing that, because the book talks about the accident, the book talks about the near death experiences, but you know, your telling is just making me be with you through all that you have shared with us, and I'm sure for the viewers as well. you know Suzy, you've always been a very thoughtful, a seeking person. So even while you were in the realm of business and corporate life, I think there was also this parallel connection that you had. Your outward journeys and your inward journeys were sort of probably going in parallel. When did the inner journey sort of take precedence and sort of start shaping, molding, guiding your work as a healer?
I think that started happening very early on again, because um, I feel from a very young age, I had this desire to be a neurosurgeon.
Okay.
I, because I had been exposed to so much human suffering, and primarily because I was so sensitive, or my perception was different from what children normally perceive. Uh, for my siblings, life was usual, it was ordinary like every other child. But for me, I was very sharply focused into human suffering, and therefore there was this desire to be uh, a brain surgeon so that I could look into people's heads to figure out what it is that caused them to suffer so much. Because as a child, I thought maybe the intellect is the source of all misery. And at that time, it was more like an organ, just a physical location of suffering. And of course, over the years, therefore, that journey or the need to find answers led me to becoming a healer, where I realized that um, It's your consciousness. It's not the physical organ, but more the entire experience of the incarnate being and their interpretations and their perceptions. And it is your entire human existence that makes you suffer. So I ended up being exactly who I wanted to be, and I allowed life to navigate me to doing it in the purest form. Because had I become a neurosurgeon, I think I would have limited myself and not been able to see the transpersonal nature of things.
Yeah, yeah. The transpersonal, that's the word you say. Your bio says a transpersonal coach. So, Suzy, what does a transpersonal coach do? How do you help your patients or coachees?
So all answers lie within us. But because we are so limited by the ego mind, by a subjective experience, we are not able to tap into the wisdom of the big mind. And this is something that I discovered during the course of writing my book also, that we actually, there are three minds that we have. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But being able to get people in touch with the big mind, which can then reveal the answers to them by taking away all the distortions of their own interpretations, is what I help people do. So it's leading them to their own truth. It's helping them find their own journeys without the deviations of those distortions.
Wow. So, Suzy, when you speak, I know you've spoken at various fora, and I'm sure your audiences must be giving you this feedback. When you listen to you and you listen to you, listening to you over and over, you kind of feel that there's something seeping into the consciousness when you speak. The manner in which your choice of words, it sort of touches a very, very inner chord. Um, the way I think you just connect and the way you express. So thank you for that. The
Thank you,
book,
Deepa, because I feel that that's how the big mind envelops us as we talk. And maybe the fact that you're perceiving it right now is that you're plugging into it yourself. So it's remarkable to have you. And I hope that all our viewers are also plugging into the big mind, because that is really the source of all comfort and all knowledge.
you know, you have a way. I've read some of your articles in the Economic Times, and there is a structure comes to you very naturally. And when you read a structure or a content put in the structure like that, it always sticks. And I've sort of marveled at your ability to express in such a cogent way and in a way that makes that knowledge and that wisdom so handy. And you do the same in your book, Seven Karma Codes. So how did the structure sort of unfold as you were writing? I'm very curious about your writer's journey. You said you wrote the first night a few pages, and how did the writing progress? Was it the 4 long years? Was it like a linear thing? Was it very circular? Did you start in a certain manner? Can you tell us?
So, Deepa, it was a very, very complex mind, because that is where the three minds revealed themselves to me. The first is the small mind, and a lot of authors write from there, and that is where my journey of writing also began. The small mind is what I call the personal mind. It uses logic and subjective experience, and the ideas come from one's own intellect. So they could be research based. You could study things up. You could speak to people. You could interview other humans and learn from their experiences. And that's more a way of gathering and assembling information, and then using the filters of your own logic to put them into some shape or form. And I think I kind of started out like that. Um, the second was, or the second mind is when we start tapping into the intelligence of other sources or entities. And I like to call that channeling. So you may be tuning into another mind that is still embodied through resonance because you think so similarly, or you may be tuning into entities that are not in physical form, that are more in spirit form, and you may be channeling information from their mind and their experience and their knowledge base. So actually, my second book was a channeled work, uh, which was called Awaken. It was a book titled Ascension. It was an ebook which I posted on my website. It was published on my website and is still there. And that piece was channeled in 2012.
Okay.
So now, in this other mind reception, you learn to separate yourself from the other mind and you recede into the background and you allow their ideas to flow through. Now, this is a form of meditative exercise and training your own mind because you have to train your mind not to interfere with the purity of the thought that is coming through. And I think all of these, I was being trained. I speak about it being my second book. My first book, actually, is an half written book which still needs completion, and that was written after the accident. And I embarked on that journey more as a therapeutic form of healing myself because I realized that I needed to vent and I needed to vent in the written space. And I was again guided and instructed. And I used to write for hours after the accident to help heal myself. And maybe someday I will go back to finishing that book and breathing life into it also. So, in a sense, the Karma Codes was my third book, or maybe even the fourth, because I started out using the small mind. And when I was using the small mind, the book took a very different shape. I started writing quite intensely about chakra psychology and how our underdeveloped chakras can contribute to human suffering. And that is again, a few chapters of that book are ready, and hopefully someday I may write about that and complete that too. To arrive at the third mind was my challenge with the book, which was the big mind. And U.S. Anderson actually talks about this, saying that there is only one mind in all of creation, and we are all part of it. And my endeavor was to plug into that one mind without the interference from my small mind, without the interference of the other minds, because even they were not that Akyum Kar or that one truth. And I wanted to receive information from the one truth. And that is why it was very tough and very complex, because I had to train myself to bridge the small mind into the big mind, and then allow the unfolding and the purity of the ideas to come through. Because what is it that I was writing about? I was writing about a, a compass for human existence. My endeavor or my intention was to provide the answer to my child, a guidance for life. And through that, provide the guidance to every child on this planet. And since all of us will go through many trying situations, even as adults, when we are reduced to our child state, like I was at the beginning of this sharing, where just working with new technology was terrifying me and reducing me to my childlike state, I realized that we all are alive to that child in us when we seek answers. And this book was supposed to provide those answers. So to be able to do something like that, I had to learn to be a scribe.
Yeah.
And that was my biggest challenge.
It's so powerful. In a sense, both, when you talk about the letting go of the limited mind, the personal mind, and sort of being awake to what is the guidance that will flow through you without being, without sort of letting any static come in the way or any disturbance come in the way. You had to prepare yourself, I guess,
Yes.
mentally, physically, train yourself for sitting long hours. I'm sure there must have been a lot of sadhana that went into just doing the book. And it must have taken a lot and also given you a lot of energy.
I think letting go of personal dogmas, prejudices, preconceptions, the needing to do something because the mind or the ego mind will say, no, this is the right thing to do. And it tries to insert logic into something which was meant to be a purely spiritual endeavor. That was very hard. And you're right. In fact, at one point, I actually tore up 150 pages. And that for an author is very difficult to do because it's like throwing away 1 year's of work. And I had to be ruthless with myself and extremely disciplined and have a Zen like approach and say, no, my commitment is that this book must be pure. So, trying to protect the integrity of the information in the book became paramount. And after that, the book was written only after deep meditation and contemplation so that I could get out of my own way.
Suzy, your book has a structure where you can actually dive in and, it's like seven little novellas or little books that I can go and discover. And I have read three, and I absolutely, I'm curious to read more. But more than that, I would like you to say there's this lovely exchange that you have with Precious. So I like the way you've got your personal experience as an adult, your experiences as a mom and a child exchange, which is so loving. And I love the way Precious's personality comes through, whether it's the story of the soup. So all the incidents and the anecdotes that you put together, and you've got the letter Sue, and it was lovely when she says, why is there a Sue in every for every of the laws, each of the laws that you've got in the book. So you want to tell our listeners a little bit about that.
So, a lot of those little anecdotes, which are so profound, are actually biographical. And it stems from the very powerful relationship I shared with Precious, my daughter, who at age 2 was showing to me that we had been together in previous lives. Even before she had any vocabulary, I remember there was this incident where one night she actually ran into our room, sat between me and my husband, and gave a staccato narration of a past life in which we were being attacked by Red Indians and how we fought that battle and ran to safety. My husband, who until that point in time was not entirely given to past life experiences or many lives kind of theories, sat up in wonderment because he said, how did this child say the things that she did? She doesn't even have this vocabulary. So, in many ways, she was my teacher. And I truly believe that if we listen to our children closely enough, they are teaching us some remarkable truths, particularly in the first 7 years of their lives when they are still retaining some of the purity of their soul lessons that come through. And each of those chapters were experiential in nature. They started unfolding. It was like I was being shown the map, I was being shown the unfolding of everything taking place. So that was really, really powerful for me. The fact that um, we had these real life experiences that were teaching me more about myself, more about what Precious needed to learn, and what could possibly become the lighthouse to all the boats that were lost at sea.
Yeah.
And in fact, I do remember that my editor had one point in time actually said that, you know, these seven, like you very rightly said, that these are almost like seven little novellas. And she suggested, she says, why don't we do a series with seven books? But then I felt that it would become very difficult for people to, go to separate roadmaps. A roadmap needs to be just one instruction, and you can visit whichever chapter is pertinent to your issue right now in life.
I'm acutely aware that we have 4 minutes to go, and I want to cover two things, Suzy. One is we've chosen this book at the year as the year begins. Tell us, who did you know, what is it that you want the prospective reader who's going to spend the next 4 weeks reading your book till we do the next author in February? What is it that they need this book for? Because I would like every one of our viewers to get hold of the book and use it as a reference book and a guide, whether it is to work with relationships or to discovering your own purpose. Tell us a little bit about that.
So the last 2 years have been very, very difficult. I think this is a call where um, we are transitioning into a more awakened community of humans. I think we are morphing as humans into a higher state of intelligence and moving from 3D consciousness, which is more about the power hunger and struggles, into actually the heart space or the anahat space of learning to love, to give and to receive equally. And therefore, this, how do you transition from this journey of being selfish to becoming selfless? This book can be the guide to help you navigate that path. If you actually just read this book and allow it to permeate your consciousness, it will help you meet with your own shadow, things about yourself that you haven't known until today. It will take you into the journey of self discovery. It will help you find purpose, and it will renew you to meet your newer, higher self in the year that follows. And depending on these very personal discoveries, I think different people will encounter the year as it unfolds in different ways. So, people who are able to embark on the journey and become more conscious and more awake are likely to have a more comforting experience through the year, because evolution is all about moving to a higher level of intelligence.
Wow, that's so powerfully said. And I think a strong reason. Before this session, I was already thinking that I would like my kids to read this book for this year because this is how I would like them to begin the year. And for me, Susie, it's not enough to just do it for me. It's so important that every kid I know and every person I
Yeah.
know for their times when they feel vulnerable and really needing help, that this book can be one more in their arsenal of help, and succor and support. Susie, your book has been translated into many languages of the world. So tell us a little bit about that. And, are you also seeing the ripple effect of writing this book through feedback?
Yes, so it's been translated into Italian, into Serbian. I find the Europeans have really embraced this book very beautifully. And I have a lot of them writing into me, and it's quite a challenge for me to use Google Translator and translate back into the languages and write to them so that I can relate to them more personally. But in the coming year, I find that one of my new projects is something that I'm really powerfully looking forward to. And that is the Karma Wisdom cards, which are being launched in Italian this coming year. And that just shows that the Italians love the idea of karma as an ideology to live their life by and to be guided by. And that too was a very powerful intention I had, is to take something that was so Indian and to take it to the world, because we have these rich treasures available within our own knowledge field here. But it's time, like I said, to go from the selfish to the selfless. And therefore, it was time to share it with all of the world, because only then can we all reach that feeling of oneness as a community, as a world community. So,
So you've answered my last question, which is what's next. So the karma cards is what we will be.
yes, but there is something still more on the next, which is my
Okay.
next book. And I'm currently writing about losing a parent and insights into the grieving process. Because a lot of work that I've done in the last 2 years has been on grief and setting up grief circles across the world. And I find that this is a very solitary experience. Again, another area where people tend to feel very lost and hopeless. And this is the one aspect that I want to bring new hope and new inspiration to people.
Suzy, thank you so much for that. And for our viewers, this is the book, Seven Karma Codes, Heal the Storm Within, that you're going to get and you're going to start reading. I would invite you to do that. And Suzy has her website, she has a page where you can access her, reach her with questions. She also does consults, so you can also seek an appointment with her if you want to connect with her. And Suzy, you didn't become that neurosurgeon because you thought you were fixing problems to the head. And I'm surprised that you didn't want to be a heart surgeon because I thought problems started from the heart or maybe from the gut. So, another part of the body. But what you've introduced us to is this magnificence that exists within us. And it's all up to us to be able to tap into that intelligence and truly experience what being one mind is all about. I cannot thank you enough for being our guest today and for helping us launch our Thoughtful Thursdays. Lots of food for thought for us. And Thursdays, as you know, is the day of the Guru. And, that's the day for someone who moves us from darkness to light. And that's what each of our 12 authors is going to be doing on this journey. Suzy, thank you once again.
Thank you so much. It's been a privilege to be here, and I'm sending lots of love to all our viewers.
Thank you. Thank you. And a happy, happy, healthy, and a safe 2022.
Thank you.
Thank you.